The mopane trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their butterfly-shaped leaves trembling under a vast and sunburned sky. It was the dry season, and the air was a still, shimmering thing, as if the land itself held its breath. Dust clung to every branch, every rock, every bootstep. Jack Morgan moved through it like a man built from stone, silent, weather-worn, and alone. His rifle was slung across his back. More habit than need. He didn't hunt. He didn't shoot unless absolutely necessary. The weight of that knowledge sat heavier than the weapon itself. What he sought out here, beneath the wide blue emptiness and among the quiet groves, was something else, something he hadn't named yet. It had been 3 years since Jack had come to the Mopane. A former Special Forces operative with too many scars, too many ghosts, and not enough reasons to go back home. He had vanished into this wilderness and emerged a volunteer ranger, unpaid, unarmed in spirit, carrying only his skill and silence. The local rangers trusted him, respected him, but they didn't ask questions. Not about what he had seen in war, not about the loss etched into the lines around his eyes. Only the boy, Tari, ever dared. But this story, this first part, happened long before Tari. It began with dust. A storm rose out of nowhere, as they often do in Mopane country, not rain, but dust. A red wall of wind and sand came barreling across the open scrublands without warning, swallowing the sky in seconds. Jack and his team were on a perimeter check near the Botswana border. Communications had already been thin. The radios cut out when the wind came howling, ripping through trees, blinding them. He shouted to the others. No answer. By the time he reached higher ground, the storm had taken everything: vision, direction, sense. Then came the fall, a twisted route beneath the scrub. Hidden by the storm, his ankle gave way. Then his shoulder slammed rock. Then blackness. When he woke, it was night, and the world had gone still. The wind had passed. The stars had returned. The temperature had dropped sharply, cold seeping through the sweat on his skin. And something was watching him. Jack froze, breath shallow. Just beyond the line of rock and shadow, a silhouette stood in silence, massive, low, motionless. Not a hyena, not a lion. The shape shimmered as it moved closer, resolving into sleek muscle and silent grace. A leopard, but darker than any Jack had seen before. Black. It didn't snarl, didn't flinch. It just looked at him, those gold glass eyes catching the starlight. Jack held its gaze, not in challenge, not in fear, just recognition. Then the leopard turned, padded forward 2 steps, and looked back, waiting. Jack blinked. "Am I hallucinating?" he whispered. The leopard, the black leopard, stepped again, heading toward the rocks. Then it paused, glancing once more, guiding. Jack pushed himself upright, groaning against the fire in his ankle and shoulder. Staggering, limping, he followed. They walked for what felt like hours. No sound but wind through the dry grass and the gentle crunch of Jack's uneven steps. Then he heard it, a soft trickle. Water. A spring. Umbra. He hadn't named her yet. But that's who she was. Stood beside it, watching as he dropped to his knees, cupped the cool water in shaking hands, and drank. He didn't question how she'd known the spring was there. He didn't speak. She watched him until he could breathe again. And then, without a sound, she turned and disappeared into the dark. In the weeks that followed, Jack tried to make sense of the event. No one believed him at first. Too much sun, too much blood, one ranger said with a shrug. A lucky dream. But the tracks were there. Large, real, a black leopard, Panthera pardus, melanistic, extremely rare. Local stories spoke of them. Ingwe Yamnyama, the shadow leopard, spirit of the bush. Jack didn't argue. He simply remembered the way she had looked at him. Not like prey, not like a threat, but like someone who understood. He named her Umbra, Latin for shadow, a name from his other life, but one that belonged to her more than it ever belonged to him. And sometimes, in the months after, he saw her again, from a distance, in the grove near the burnt baobab, watching him from high in the tree, at dusk by the old elephant path, her shape cut from smoke and silence. She never came close. He never called her, but they saw each other. And that was enough. People spoke of taming wild things. Jack never believed in it. You don't tame fire. You sit by it. You warm your hands. If it lets you. Sometimes. It burns you. Sometimes. It saves your life. Umbra was like that. One evening, nearly a year later, Jack sat alone by a small campfire near a ranger outpost. The sky was full of stars. The kind of silence that only came after long days and longer thinking settled around him. Then, behind him, the grass rustled, barely. He turned his head. There, 20 yards away, Umbra stood beneath the shadow of a mopani tree, her body blacker than the night behind her, her eyes like two lanterns. She didn't move, neither did he, and in the breath between silence and sound, something old and wounded inside him breathed out for the first time in years. He would later tell Tari, years later, when the boy was older and bolder, that the leopard had saved him once. Maybe twice. Tari would say, "You mean physically?" Jack would shrug. "More than that." And when the boy asked if Umbra was a friend, Jack would smile. "No," he'd say, "she's wild, not mine." Then he'd pause. "But she remembers." And for Jack, that was enough. The Mopani woods never truly slept. Even in the deepest hours of the night, when moonlight carved silver patterns through the dry leaves and the wind slipped like breath between trees. The land was listening, watching, waiting. Jack Morgan had come to understand that silence was not emptiness. In this wilderness, silence was a kind of speech, a language spoken in tracks, in broken branches, in scents the human nose could barely detect. And in that language, something had begun to speak to him. Or rather, someone. It had been almost a year since the night he'd first seen her. Umbra. And she had never quite left. There was a pattern to it now, a strange rhythm between their paths. He would find a claw mark on the flat stone near the eastern ridge. Always at dawn. Just one. Clean, deliberate. Once. A circle of scattered bones near a watering hole, not kill remains, but set apart carefully, as if arranged to say, "Look here. Be warned." Once, a pile of trampled brush, just where a trap had been. Jack never saw her make these marks, but he knew it was her. There was no other animal in the region that moved like that, unseen, yet ever present. She was not a pet, not an ally. She was wild, and yet, she was also something else. That night, the air was tight with heat, unnatural for the hour. No clouds, no moon, just a red haze clinging to the trees. Jack was on patrol along the southern boundary. Alone. The local rangers had spotted signs of human movement the week before. Traps, footprints, cigarette ash pressed into the dirt. Poachers. He moved without light, without sound, as the land had taught him. As she had taught him. Then he stopped. A scent. Sharp. Oil. Metal. Sweat. Not animal. Human. He crept up a low embankment and peered over. 3 men. Rough clothes. Dust-caked boots. Machetes on their belts. Old rifles slung across their backs. One of them was hammering a stake into the dry earth with the heel of his boot. At their feet, a snare trap. Half buried. Jack's jaw tightened. He reached slowly for his radio. Then he heard something else. A rustle. To his left. He turned. And there she was. Umbra. Low to the ground. Watching the poachers. A shadow within shadows. But not moving to attack. Instead, her gaze flicked sideways. To Jack. And then downward. He followed her eyes. Just below the ridge. Another shape. Small. Still. A cub. Barely 6 months old. Wedged into the rocks. Too scared to flee. The trap wasn't for her. It was for the cub. Umbra's cub. He didn't know, but she had led him here. There wasn't time to think. The poachers were adjusting the snare. Jack slid down the embankment in one silent motion. His hands moved fast, disabling the secondary trap first. Snipping the wire, he threw a small stone to the left, drawing the men's attention away as he slipped through the brush to reach the cub. The young leopard hissed, trying to back further into the rock crevice. Jack didn't hesitate. He dropped his gear, removed his shirt, and covered the cub's head gently, muffling its cries. It scratched, but weakly. Then a shout. The poachers had seen movement. They turned, one pointing. Jack didn't run. He stood, cub in his arms, and looked toward the ridge. A shape moved between trees. Umbra. She stepped from the dark. Full form revealed in moonlight, now emerging behind thin clouds, sleek. Wide-shouldered, eyes lit like coals. She didn't roar. She didn't need to. The men froze. One stepped back, stumbling. Another raised his rifle, then thought better of it. No one moved. And then, as fast as she had come, she vanished into the trees. But the message had been sent. And the men, terrified, shaken, wordless, ran. Jack stood alone now, heart racing, arms aching. The cub squirmed against his chest. But he held it firm and steady. Above, the wind returned, rustling the mopane trees like distant applause. By dawn, The cub was safe in the medical tent of the northern outpost. It would survive, bruised, dehydrated, frightened, but alive. Jack hadn't slept. Instead, he sat on the step of the ranger station, watching the first lights stretch across the plains. Tari found him there. The boy, now 12, carried a mug of warm tea and handed it to Jack silently. Jack nodded, sipping slowly. "What happened?" Tari asked. Jack looked toward the tree line. "A trap. For a cub. Did you stop them?" "I had help." Tari waited. He had grown patient, the way mopane trees grow patient through drought. Jack hesitated, then spoke again. "She was there." Tari blinked. "Umbra." Jack nodded. "She led me to it." Watched from the trees. The boy sat beside him, eyes wide. "Why?" Jack's voice softened. "Because I owe her. She knows that." "And the cub? Was it hers?" Jack shook his head. "I don't know, but maybe that didn't matter to her." They sat in silence for a while. Then Tari asked, "Do you think she knew the poachers were coming?" Jack nodded slowly. "She always knows." Later that day, Jack found another mark. At the stone outcrop near the fire trail, the same place he'd seen Umbra before. A single claw mark, deep, cut into the rock itself. Just one. A reminder. A message. "We are not done." That night, Jack sat beneath the stars with Tari at the edge of the grove. He spoke more than usual. Told him about that first night. Years ago, after the dust storm, how he'd awoken broken and alone. And seen her, a shadow guarding his breath. How she had shown him water. How she had disappeared, and returned, and disappeared again. Tari listened without interrupting, eyes wide in the dark. Then Jack said quietly, "I owe her my life." He paused. "And maybe she knows she owes me now, too." Tari looked into the darkness. Lips parted. "Like a pact," he whispered. Jack nodded. "Not made with words. Not with promises." Then, softly, with memory. In the distance, somewhere between silence and savanna, a low sound echoed. Not a roar. Not a warning. Just a breath in the night. And the wind carried it like a thread through the mopane. A reminder that wildness remembers more than we think. And sometimes, it repays its debts. The wind shifted wrong that morning. It blew hot from the northwest, dry, insistent, relentless, the kind of wind that carried not just dust, but warning. Jack Morgan knew the signs. He had learned them in places where fire was a weapon, and where survival hinged on minutes. By noon, the sky turned strange. Not cloudy, but thick. A dull, bruised orange began to bleed across the horizon. And with it came the scent. Sharp, acrid, ancient, smoke, from somewhere deep within the mopane. And it was coming fast. He didn't wait. Rangers scrambled to trace the source, calling over the patchy radios, while Jack took his ATV straight into the trees, toward the southern lowlands. That was where the undergrowth was dry and dense, where the fire would feast first. He didn't think of orders. He didn't think of safety. He only thought of the wildlife, and of the traps poachers left behind, snares and pits that could become graves in a fire. The smoke thickened. The trees thinned. He killed the engine and ran the rest on foot, covering his face with a scarf as heat bled through the earth itself. Then he heard it. A scream, not human, but young, high-pitched, panicked. He ran harder, and there it was, a baby elephant. No more than a year old. One foot caught in a snare wire buried under the dust. Its trunk flailed wildly, trumpeting in pure terror. The flames had not yet reached it, but the smoke was thick, and fire licked the treetops just a few hundred meters away. Jack dropped to his knees beside it, heart pounding. "No, no, no, stay still," he muttered, fingers working fast. The wire was tight, deep, blood already pooled. He didn't have cutters, no backup, no signal. His breath came hard. Fire crackled louder. The baby elephant cried again, wild with fear. And then the wind shifted. Again. A gust carried a wall of embers up over the ridge behind him. He turned. The fire was here. Flames snapped through the branches above. A tree exploded into sparks. Jack threw his body over the elephant, shielding it, coughing violently. "Come on, damn it." The wire was too tight. And then, a sound. Low, fierce, a growl through smoke. Jack looked up, barely able to see, but through the haze. A shape emerged from the burning trees like a ghost of shadow and flame. Umbra. Her coat, once nearly invisible in the night, now stood stark against the orange glow. Her eyes lit not with fear, but purpose. She did not run from the fire. She moved toward him. Jack froze, disoriented, ash falling like snow. Umbra snarled, a sharp, commanding sound. Then she lunged forward, not at him, beside him. She rammed his shoulder, knocking him off balance. Jack stumbled sideways, fell hard onto the ash-covered dirt. And at that same moment, a branch above cracked and crashed into the spot where he had been kneeling. Fire bloomed. The elephant shrieked, yanked free in panic, the wire snapping at last under the tension. It limped toward the open field, still crying, and Umbra turned, looked at Jack through the smoke. Her eyes held him for one long second. Then she ran into the fire. Not away. Umbra. He choked, but the flames swallowed her form. He staggered after, but the heat forced him back. The air itself burned. Umbra. She didn't come back. Only her shadow, caught in the flicker of firelight, lingered in his memory, the way she turned her head, her eyes reflecting flame, not fear. Then gone, like smoke. He didn't remember how he got out. He remembered falling. He remembered the hiss of fire behind him, the crack of burning branches. He remembered the sound of the young elephant breaking through brush, calling out for its herd. And he remembered Umbra's shove, the intentional, almost human movement of her body. She saved me. Again. By nightfall, the fire had been partially contained. Rain came, late, but merciful, and the flames began to die. But the damage had been done. Jack was treated for burns along his arms and neck. His voice was hoarse. His boots were melted at the soles. But he asked for only one thing: find her. Drones were dispatched. Rangers combed the area. But there were no tracks. No body, no sign, only scorched earth and silence. 2 days later, Jack sat beside the edge of the same ridge where he had once followed Umbra to water. Now the rocks were blackened, charred. Tari sat beside him, older now, eyes hollow with grief. "She's gone?" he whispered. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a scorched piece of wire. The trap that had caught the elephant. He placed it on the ground beside him. "Why would she do that?" Tari asked, tears in his voice. "Why go back in?" Jack looked out at the horizon. "She saw something I didn't," he said quietly. "Maybe another cub, maybe another trap, or maybe," he swallowed, "maybe she was just finishing what she started. The fire didn't scare her. But it scared me." Tari leaned his head on Jack's shoulder. "Do you think she knew you loved her?" Jack's voice broke. "I think she didn't need to." That night, the winds were gentle again. The mopane leaves shimmered in silver moonlight. And though no growl echoed from the woods, no eyes glowed from the trees, something hung in the air, thick as smoke, but weightless. Memory. And in that memory, a great shadow moved through the fire not to destroy, but to save. As if even the wild, in its rawest form, could remember what it owed. The fire ended. But Jack didn't. He walked with new burns on his arms and an old ache deep beneath his ribs, one that didn't heal with bandages or salves. Umbra was gone. Or at least, she hadn't been found. The forest had offered no answer. No body, no bones, just blackened soil and long silences. The other rangers stopped looking after a week. The reports were closed. The fire catalogued. Life, they said, had to move forward. But Jack wasn't ready to move. Not when she had turned back into flame for him. Tari stayed by his side through it all. He didn't ask much anymore. Just walked with him. Through the tall grass. Over the baked riverbeds. Across paths that Umbra had once marked with claw or gaze. They searched for signs in broken bark. In distant tracks. In the echo of bird calls cut short. Sometimes, it felt like chasing smoke. Sometimes, it felt like chasing God. Months passed. The dry season ended. The rains came, late. Uncertain. Then all at once. Washing the soot from the trees and breathing green back into the world. The mopane bloomed again. But no Umbra. She could have made it, Tari said one morning, crouched near an old stone trailhead. Eyes tracing paw prints from a different leopard. Jack said nothing. "She's smart. Smarter than anything I've ever seen." "I know," Jack finally replied. Tari looked up at him. But she wasn't running from the fire. They both knew it. Umbra had run into it. They widened the search after that. They left food stations near watering holes. Placed trail cameras at old watchpoints. Once, they followed a set of heavy prints for 2 days. Only to realize they belonged to a hyena with a limp. Jack never lost patience. But he didn't say much either. He didn't need to. The silence between them was enough. Then came the night. The sky was clear. Not cloudless. But clear. The kind of night that laid every star bare and made the horizon feel like a secret whispered from far away. Jack had left the outpost after dinner, saying nothing to Tari, just his boots, his old jacket, a canteen, and the trail. He walked without a flashlight, guided by the way memory shaped the land, past the twisted baobab, across the shallow gully, through the grove that once held poachers' traps, now reclaimed by brush, until he reached the stone ridge, the place where it all began, where he'd first seen her, where she had watched over him as he bled and coughed beneath a broken sky, where she had shown him water. He sat down slowly, knees popping, breath slow. He didn't expect anything. He wasn't waiting. He was just remembering. The wind shifted, not strong, just enough to stir the mopani leaves. Then something more, a sound, barely audible, a soft footstep. Jack didn't move. He kept his eyes on the horizon. His heartbeat stayed even. Then, a flicker of motion at the edge of the ridge. Low to the ground, steady, watching. He turned his head, slowly, and met a pair of eyes in the dark. Gold, bright, unblinking, umbra, or a dream of her. She stood half-shrouded in bush, her body nearly invisible except for the firelight glint in her eyes. She didn't step closer, she didn't run, she watched, and in the stillness, Jack saw something that stopped his breath. Her left flank, barely visible, bore a patch of lighter fur. A burn, small, healed. She had survived. Jack didn't speak at first. He only nodded, as if to say, "I see you." And then, softer than the breeze itself, he whispered, "Tau biet me vano du. I know you're still out there." She blinked once. Then, without sound, she turned and vanished into the dark. No roar, no trace, only the impression of grace, and the quiet hum of something ancient, alive, and fiercely free. Jack sat there long after she'd gone. He didn't try to follow. He didn't call her back. He just sat in the moonlight with his hands folded in his lap and the silence wrapped around him like a second skin. A kind of peace. Not closure, but peace. By the time he returned to camp at dawn, Tari was waiting on the step, half asleep, wrapped in a blanket. Jack gave him a tired nod. The boy opened one eye. "Anything?" Jack sat beside him. He didn't answer directly, just looked toward the trees. And smiled. In that smile was everything the forest could not say. Everything words would fail. Hope, memory, gratitude, and the knowing that some shadows are not to be feared, but followed. Years passed like seasons in Mopani country, slow, warm, eternal. Jack Morgan grew older, though not slower. His hair turned silver, the lines around his eyes deepened. Not with grief, but with something gentler, acceptance, maybe, or wisdom carved from silence. The forest knew him now. Not as a trespasser, not even as a ranger, but as something else, a man who had listened and remembered. There came a season, just after the rains, when the underbrush grew thick and green, that Jack decided it was time. He woke before dawn, brewed tea over a low flame, packed his satchel with a notebook, a hammer, and a smooth, oval stone he'd carried for years. And then, with Tari at his side, now a man, strong and tall, though still wearing that same wide-eyed wonder. They walked into the forest one last time. They walked without urgency, the way you do when you know the land remembers you. The air was cool, birdsong followed them, and mopane leaves danced in the breeze. By midday, they reached the clearing, the very same place where Jack had once nearly died. The place where Umbra had stood over him like a sentinel. The stream still ran, thinner now, more a whisper than a river. The rocks bore the soot scars from the great fire years ago. But green had returned in pockets, like quiet forgiveness. And in the center of it all, Jack knelt. He placed the stone into the earth, flat, dark, and cool, and tapped it gently with the back of the hammer, settling it into the soil. Then, with the edge of a chisel, he carved the words he'd written and rewritten 100 times in the back of his weathered field journal. His hand didn't shake. The words came clean. Umbra, not a beast, a guardian, a friend. They didn't speak after it was done. Tari stood back, quiet, his arms crossed over his chest. Jack sat beside the stone, just watching the wind pass through the grass. He closed his eyes for a moment and saw her there, not as she had been in flame or smoke, or memory, but simply there, breathing, watching, still wild, still hers. In the months that followed, Jack wrote. He set up a small cabin near the reserve's edge, not for solitude, but for reflection. The days were slow, filled with pages and rewrites, with long pauses where he stared out the window toward the tree line and waited for the right sentence to arrive. He called the book, "The Shadow That Saved Me," not a memoir in the usual sense. No stories of war, no medals, no names of battles fought, only the story of her, of Umbra, of the fire, the cub, the stone, the debt, and the truth that in the heart of the most feared creature, Jack had found something he'd long thought lost in himself: loyalty, instinct, grace, a kind of wild love. When the book was published, it surprised everyone, especially Jack. It was picked up by a conservation press, then by a global imprint, translated into 10 languages, praised for its intimacy, its starkness, and its reverence for the line between man and nature. Veterans read it, rangers taught it, children listened to it around fire pits in rural schools. Tari carried copies into villages himself, often reading aloud the final chapter. But it was the last page that stopped everyone. A photograph, black and white, taken quietly, by a camera trap Jack had set himself, not for research, not for fame, just to know. The frame showed Jack, older, seated beside the stone in the clearing, one hand resting gently on its carved surface. Beside him, not far, not close, was a single, perfect paw print in the dirt. Sharp, fresh, no dust had settled in it yet. No wind had smudged it. It was new, as if she'd just left. As if she had come and gone again. As always, a whisper of shadow at the edge of the known world. Jack never confirmed whether he saw her again after that. When asked in interviews, he would simply smile and say, "She was never mine to find." Then he'd pause, and add, but she always knew how to find me. In time, people began visiting the Mopani forest not to chase leopards, but to understand them. A small stone path led to the carved memorial. And often, just before dusk, travelers said they saw something move among the trees, silent, dark, powerful, no roars, no photos, just a sense of being watched, protected, remembered. Tari eventually became the lead guide of the region, and on special occasions, he would take young visitors out to the stone. He would place a hand on it, as Jack once had, and whisper, "She was a shadow, but not of fear, of trust." In the wild, memories do not fade like they do in cities. They grow roots, and in the place where a black leopard once stood between man and flame, a new kind of legend had taken hold, not of hunters or warriors, but of loyalty without language, of debt without demand, and of love without ever needing to be tamed.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.